July 1521, the southwest corner of Florida, a Spanish ship sits at anchor. Now on board, colonists, priests, horses, cattle, seeds and tools to build a town. It's move-in time. The man who organized it did this before. He found this land himself 8 years earlier. He's the governor of Puerto Rico, and by the standards of his day, he's about as powerful as a man can get. So he brings his colonists ashore to start building, and the people who already live there, the Colosa, well, they've seen the Spaniards before. They know exactly what these ships mean, so they attack. It's a real battle, not a skirmish. Several of his men go down, and the governor takes an arrow to the thigh. Now, a thigh wound back in 1521, that's a big deal. No antibiotics, no clean blades, no real surgeons. The wound goes bad, and things go south fast. So they carry him back to the ship, they abandon the colony, and they sail for the nearest Spanish town, Havana, Cuba. And that's where he dies. Here's what makes this strange. The man bleeding out on the ship is about to become the most famous person who ever lived to search for one specific thing, a magic spring, water that makes old men young again, the fountain of youth. Every school kid in America learns about Ponce de Leon and the fountain of youth. 500 years of books, movies, cartoons. So this must be true, right? Not so much. In everything he ever wrote, every contract, every letter, every royal order, he never mentions a fountain. Not the word, not the idea, nada. So the most famous fountain hunter in history never told a single living soul he was looking for it. So where does the story come from? And if the fountain was never the real mission, what was? The man's name is Juan Ponce de León, and he's only the first. Because for the next 500 years, the most powerful people on earth, kings, dictators, billionaires, they keep hunting the exact same thing. And they keep refusing to tell us why. I'm John Genoa, and you're watching America's Strangest History, coming at you from the great state of Vermont. This is the truth behind the Fountain of Youth. Stay with me. Before we start slinging accusations around, let's take a look at the man. Juan Ponce de Leon, born Spain, 1474, minor nobility. He's not rich, he's not connected. He's the kind of guy who had to earn it. And in 1493, he gets his shot. He sails west with Christopher Columbus. Not the famous first voyage, this is the second one. 17 ships, over 1,000 men. This is Columbus's coming back to colonize for good. Ponce is a soldier on that voyage, and he's real good at it. Fast forward about 10 years, he's on the island of Hispaniola, 1504. The native Taino rise up in a region called Higüey, and Ponce helps put the rebellion down, hard. And he gets paid for it. The crown hands him 200 acres, he gets native laborers to work the land, and a title, adelantado, basically a frontier governor. He builds a town, León, raises cassava, sweet potatoes, hogs, cattle, sells food to every ship passing through, and he gets rich. So a guy with nothing turns a conquest into a business and builds a little empire on an island nobody was watching. He's basically a 16th century startup founder. Then he hears about another island. The natives call it Borican. Borican, you know as Puerto Rico. He saw it from Columbus's ship years earlier, and in 1508, he goes and takes it. He settles it, he finds gold, a lot of gold, and for a few years, he runs the whole place. And then, in 1511, he loses it. Here's how. Remember Christopher Columbus? Remember that guy? Columbus had a son, Diego Colón, and Diego takes the Spanish crown to court. His argument, my father was promised the right to appoint governors of these islands. That right belongs to my family. And he wins. The Council of Castile rules for the Columbus family. And just like that, Ponce de Leon is out. Think about that. The island he conquered, the gold he dug out of it, is handed over to the heir of a man whose ship he first sailed on. Too bad, so sad for Ponce de Leon. So now you've got a wealthy, proud, ruthless conquistador, 38 years old, who just got stripped of the one thing he built. And he wants it back, or he wants something bigger. And the crown, feeling a little guilty, floats him a deal. There's a king's man in the Caribbean named Passamote, and Passamote tells Ponce, there's a land out there north of here, islands that nobody's claimed yet. And the Indians, they tell stories about one of them. They call it Bimini. So on February 23rd, 1512, Ponce de Leon signs a contract with the King of Spain. It's a real document. We have it today. It's got a name, a capitulation, and here's everything that contract says he's allowed to do. Find Bimini, settle Bimini, govern Bimini, pay for the entire expedition out of his own pocket, and in return, keep a big cut of whatever's there. And there's supposed to be a lot there. The contract literally lays out the accounting procedure for the gold and the riches that the Indians swear are sitting on that island. Want to know what that contract does not say? Anything about a fountain? Nothing about a fountain of youth. Not one time. So no fountain water, no youth, no spring, nothing like that. The most famous search for the fountain of youth in human history kicks off with a real estate and gold contract that never once mentions anything about it. And if you're thinking maybe they just left it out, well, 2.5 years later, the Crown amends the contract and still nothing. Every original document tied to this man, his letters, his orders, his patents, nothing about a fountain of youth. So if the fountain's not in the paperwork, and it's not in a single word he's ever written, where does it come from? Where did this magic water story come from? The answer? A man who never sailed with him. He's sitting in Spain. He's writing it down years after Ponce was already in the ground. His name is González Fernández de Oviedo, and in 1535, he writes a book, and not just any book. Oviedo is the great chronicler of the Spanish New World. His history of the Indies is considered the finest of the entire century. When Oviedo writes something down, it becomes history. And Oviedo didn't really like Juan Ponce de León. In his book, Oviedo goes after Ponce, calls him vain, calls him credulous, a fool who chases silly ventures just to feed his own ego. And then he tells a story. Oviedo says that some Indians in the Caribbean played Ponce for a sucker, told them there was an enchanted spring hidden on the islands of Bimini, water that made old men young, and Ponce believed it. So gullible, Oviedo says, that Ponce and his men wandered the islands for 6 months hunting for magic water. That's where it comes from, ladies and gents. That's the birth of the legend. A burn in a history book written by a guy who couldn't stand him. And Oviedo ain't done. He twists the knife. He says, "Oh, I've seen old men turn young all right, but not from any fountain." It happens when a man's brain goes soft, when he gets old and senile and starts acting like a foolish little boy. And that, Oviedo says, is exactly what happened to Ponce de Leon. Yeah. So the Fountain of Youth legend doesn't start with a quest. It's basically an insult. To be fair, Oviedo doesn't pull the fountain thing out of thin air. The rumor was already floating around. Back in April of 1514, Ponce is back in Spain reporting to the king. He's got a problem. He came home with no treasure, no gold, no jewels, nothing the other conquistadors were hauling back. So the story goes, the royal court started cracking jokes. Poor Ponce. Guess he went looking for that fountain of youth instead. It's a joke. At a broke man's expense. And around the same time, December 1514, there's a historian named Peter Martyr. And Martyr writes a letter to the Pope himself about a rumored spring in the New World. Water that rejuvenates old men. Just that Martyr puts the spring on a totally different island, tied it to a totally different explorer. He's never connected it to Ponce de Leon. In fact, nobody did. Not till Oviedo, 21 years later, decided to pin it on him. And once he did, it stuck. Now, 1575, a shipwreck survivor named Escalante Fortunada, is a man who spent 17 years as a captive of the Calusa. Well, he writes his own memoir, and he takes the legend and exaggerates it even bigger. Then comes the big one. 1601, Antonio de Herrera, the official royal historian of the Spanish Empire. Now, this man has access to the crown's official archives, and its secret ones too. And get this, Herrera had Ponce's actual logbook from the 1513 voyage, the real one, sitting right in front of him. And he still wrote that the search was for a magic spring, and it was just as important as the real mission. 80 years after Ponce was dead, the official historian of Spain made the fountain part of the permanent record. Game over. Once Herrera writes it down, it's true. Now fast forward to 1849, an American writer you've probably heard of, Washington Irving, the Sleepy Hollow guy. He picks up Herrera's version and turns it into a romantic American legend. And from there, school books, Hollywood, like I said, cartoons, a literal tourist attraction in St. Augustine, Florida, where they sell you the water. People are paying to drink it. 500 years of history built on a court joke, a chronicler's grudge, and an exaggeration of an exaggeration. Not a single one of those men ever set foot on Ponce's ship. And so that's the Ponce de Leon Fountain of Youth. It's put to bed. But I want you to hold on to one word, Bimini, that little island in Ponce's contract, the one everybody forgot about. 400 years later, a man's going to fall asleep in a chair in Virginia and go into a trance and start talking about Bimini again. And what he says about it, we're going to circle back to. His name is Edgar Cayce, and here's how Edgar Cayce works. He lies down on a couch, he closes his eyes, and he puts himself into a trance, asleep. And while he's out, he talks. Somebody in the room asks him a question about your health, your past lives, the future, and Cayce, sound asleep, answers. They called him the sleeping prophet. Now, over his life, Cayce gives around 14,000 of these readings, every single one written down. A stenographer in the room is taking dictation. It's filed, it's numbered, it's archived. You can go read it today. A lot of them are about healing sick people, but some of them go somewhere else entirely, because Edgar Cayce talked about Atlantis, and it's not as a fairy tale. He talked about it as a real place that really sank, and the Atlanteans he described were advanced. I'm talking giant crystals, firestones that powered the whole civilization, aircraft, wireless energy, even death rays. This was back in the 1930s, decades before lasers and atomic power existed. Here's where it ties to our story. Cayce said the Atlanteans cracked it. The human body, he said, could be regenerated, made young again, rejuvenated through the power of the stone. Does this sound familiar? The Fountain of Youth. Except in Atlantis, it wasn't a spring, it was technology. And Cayce said the records, the blueprint for it, didn't vanish when Atlantis went under. They got hidden in 3 places on Earth. One in Egypt by the Sphinx, one in the Yucatan, and one under the ocean, off an island near the coast of Florida called Bimini. The same Bimini, the one in Ponce de Leon's contract. 400 years later, a sleeping man in Virginia Beach points right back to it. But Cayce didn't just say where, he said when. In a reading the archives date to June 1940, Cayce says this: Poseidia, a piece of the sunken Atlantis, will be among the first portions to rise again, expected in 68 or 69, not so far away. 68 or 69? He put a date on it. And then in 1945, Edgar Cayce dies. So whatever's coming in 68, the sleeping prophet isn't going to be around to see it. Now, September 2nd, 1968, a man named J. Mason Valentine is diving off of North Bimini. And Valentine's a zoologist, PhD out of Yale, honorary curator at the Miami Museum of Science. He's a serious scientist. He's down about 20 feet in that clear Bahamian water, and he looks at the bottom and he sees something pretty cool. Stones, huge flat limestone blocks, rectangular, lined up in a row, running off into the distance for a half a mile, and then curving at the end like a giant letter J. It looks like a road, a wall, the foundation of something enormous, and it's just sitting there on the seafloor, off Bimini, the exact island in the exact decade that a dead psychic called almost 30 years earlier. They name it the Bimini Road, and the Atlantis crowd loses their mind. This is it. Poseidia. It's rising right on schedule. Cayce nailed it. Not so much. Enter a geologist named Eugene Shin, U.S. Geological Survey, and Shin takes one look at the Bimini Road and says, this is just beach rock, so no road. And in fact, beach rock is a real thing. Limestone that forms in big flat sheets along the shoreline, and when it cracks into straight lines and rectangles all on its own. Nature's a fascinating thing. No Atlanteans are required. Shin runs the science, he dates the rock, and the numbers come back a few thousand years old, not 12,000. So, not Atlantis. And one more problem. Valentine was a believer. He knew the Cayce prophecy. He went to Bimini hunting for sunken Atlantis because a psychic told him to look there. So when you go searching for a magic road and you find some rectangular rocks, how hard are you really going to look for a boring answer? Gets weirder because round about the same time, Ernest Hemingway's little brother, a guy named Lester Hemingway, he announces that he found the Fountain of Youth on Bimini. He's actually talking about a pool on the island, mineral water, high in lithium, and Lester claims it eased what was ailing him. In fact, there's a real spot out there that locals call the Healing Hole. Sulfur water bubbles up through the mangroves. Divers around Bimini even report a weird feeling in the water, a pressure, an aura like a force field. Although the skeptics point out Bimini in those years was a smuggler's paradise, and a lot of the island's energy arrived in smuggled goods. And as for Lester Hemingway, his story doesn't end well. Battling his health in 1982, he unalived himself. This was a man who said that he found water that heals everything. So did Edgar Cayce actually see the future? The geologists have a clean answer. Natural rock, wishful thinking, a prophecy that sent believers looking till they found something, and that's probably right. But he named the island. He named the years. He was in the ground before either of it came true, and there is something there off Bimini, half a mile of it, that people still argue about today. Is it coincidence? Maybe. That's your call. Now, while American dreamers were diving for Atlantis, on the other side of the world, the hunt for the Fountain of Youth had already gone somewhere a whole lot darker. A real laboratory, a real government, and a recipe that started with dead bodies. Picture a laboratory somewhere in the Soviet Union. It's 1934. Now on the table, there's a body. A young man, he's dead less than 12 hours, healthy right up until whatever accident killed him. And the scientists go to work on that body. They take out the spleen, they take out the bone marrow. According to accounts of how this serum was made, they grind that tissue down and they inject it into a horse. The horse's blood reacts to it, builds up antibodies. Then they bleed the horse, they spin the blood down to a serum, and they inject that into people. Now what kind of people? Old people, sick people, cancer patients, soldiers with wounds that won't close. They call it the anti-reticular cytotoxic serum, ACS for short. And the man who invented it believes that he's found the brake pedal on human aging. This time we're not talking fairy tale. No psychic in a trance. This is a real serum made in a real state-sponsored laboratory, handed out across the Soviet Union by millions of doses. And the most powerful man in that part of the world, Joseph Stalin, is paying for all of it. So how did we get here with this bizarre cocktail? Well, you gotta meet two men. The first is Alexander Bogdanov. Bogdanov's a Bolshevik, a true believer. He helped build the Russian Revolution. And Bogdanov has an idea, a big one. He thinks that the secret to a perfect society is shared blood. Literally. He believes if people transfuse each other's blood, they mix it, they exchange it, they don't just become equals, they get younger, stronger, a blood brotherhood for all mankind. So in the 1920s, Bogdanov sets up an institute in Moscow dedicated to exactly that, and he starts running the experiments. On who? On himself. Over and over, Bogdanov transfuses other people's blood into his own veins. He's chasing that rejuvenation. And in 1928, one of those transfusions goes wrong. The blood's no good. His body rejects it. And Alexander Bogdanov dies. He's killed by the very experiment he thought would make him young. Now hold that thought, because a second man, he doesn't make Bogdanov's mistake this time. His name is Alexander Bogomolets. Bogomolets is a brilliant physiologist, and he's got a theory about why we get old. He thinks aging lives in your connective tissue, the stuff that holds your body together. Stiffen it, weaken it, and you age. Keep it young, and so are you. And his serum, the ACS, is designed to do exactly that, to wake the tissue back up. Bogomolets claims his serum heals wounds, it fights infections, it builds resistance to cancer, and the big one, it slows down aging itself. In 1938, he lays it all out in a book, The Prolongation of Life. Bogomolets argues that the human body isn't built to quit at 70. He thinks that we should be running well past 100, maybe 125, maybe 150. Stalin loves this. Think about what he's being offered. Not just a healthier workforce, not just soldiers who heal faster, a scientific fountain of youth owned by the state. So Stalin showers Bogomolets with everything, puts him in charge of science for the entire Soviet Republic, gives him the Order of Lenin, the hero of the socialist labor, the highest honors the country's got. The serum goes out by the millions of doses, and the story goes that Stalin himself takes it. The Fountain of Youth finally found a sponsor, and it's the most feared man on the planet. Now, did any of this actually work? Not so much. When Western scientists finally got their hands on the ACS and tested it, they couldn't confirm the anti-aging claims, not at all. The serum was real, the needles were real, the youth, Nobody outside the USSR could find. And here's how it really ends. In 1946, Alexander Bogomolets dies. He's 65 years old, killed by tuberculosis, a disease he's been fighting since he was young. So the man who told the whole Soviet Union they could live to 150 doesn't make it to 66. And Stalin, when Bogomolets died, the record says that Stalin felt grossly deceived, like he'd been swindled. And with Bogomolets gone and Stalin burned, a rival faction of Soviet scientists move in. They put his life's work on trial posthumously. They brand his whole theory of aging anti-scientific, a heresy. They go after his institute and try to shut the doors. The biggest state-backed search for the fountain of youth in history doesn't just fail, it gets buried, erased, declared a lie. Same as a conquistador mocked into a cartoon. Same as a psychic written off as wishful thinking. Every time somebody gets close, the search gets shut down. And every time, somebody new picks it right back up. And the next ones to try wouldn't be revolutionaries. They wouldn't answer to a dictator. They'll have more money than Stalin ever dreamed of, and they'll be doing it in the open. So here we are, present day, and the search for the fountain of youth didn't die in the Soviet lab. It just moved to California. And this time, the people chasing it aren't conquistadors or prophets or dictators. They're the richest human beings who ever lived, and they're not hiding it. Start with the man with the deepest pockets. Larry Ellison, founder of Oracle, one of the wealthiest people on planet Earth, worth somewhere around $200 billion. And Ellison has a problem with death, a personal one. His biographer quotes him as saying, "Death has never made any sense to me. How can a person just be there and then vanish?" Ellison does what I suppose any man with $200 billion does. He tries to buy the answer. Back in 1997, he starts the Ellison Medical Foundation, and over the next 16 years, he pours around $430 million into anti-aging research. Harvard, the Buck Institute, Rockefeller, the best labs in America. Then in 2013, something strange happens. The foundation just stops. It quietly shuts down all its aging grants. No big announcement, no real explanation. The biggest private anti-aging research engine in the country goes dark. It's curious, because in that exact same year, 2013, somebody else steps up and takes a swing at it. And it's not somebody, it's Google. In 2013, Google launches a company called Calico, the California Life Company. And Calico's mission is to solve death. Time magazine puts it right on the cover. Can Google solve death? Larry Page, Google's co-founder, funds it with over $1 billion. And then he does something very Silicon Valley. He makes it a secret. Calico barely publishes, barely talks. $1 billion war on aging, and it's run behind a curtain. Sounds kind of familiar. Then comes Jeff Bezos. In 2021, Bezos helps launch a company called Altos Labs. And Altos comes out of the gate with $3 billion. It's the single biggest startup launch in the history of biotech. And Altos isn't messing with vitamins. They're chasing something called cellular reprogramming. The idea is that you take an old cell and you flip it back to a young one. Now this is real science, Nobel Prize science. And as of right now, Altos has started its first safety tests in actual humans. It's pretty cool, right? Then there's Sam Altman, the ChatGPT guy, the face of the AI boom. Altman puts $180 million of his own money into a longevity startup called Retro Biosciences. And here's the twist that only happens in 2026. Retro hooked up with Altman's other company, OpenAI, and they're using artificial intelligence to design the proteins that turn old cells young. The machines are now helping us hunt the fountain of youth. Retro's already valued at nearly $2 billion, and they've got their first drug in human trials as we speak. I'll take some of that, please. And then there's the man who turned his own body into the laboratory, Bryan Johnson. Johnson's not the richest one on the list, but he might be the most extreme. He spends $2 million a year trying not to die. He even named the protocol Don't Die. The man takes over 100 pills a day. He eats his last meal of the day at 11 in the morning. He measures every organ in his body on a schedule. He's had stem cells injected into his joints. He's got gene therapy. He calls himself the most measured human being who's ever lived. And the internet has a nickname for him, Immortal Unk. Netflix made a whole documentary about him. Came out last year. The title is Don't Die. So step back now and let's look at what we've got. The richest man in software, the biggest company in search, the king of online retail, the face of artificial intelligence, and a guy measuring his own organs for a Netflix show. Every one of them all at once pouring their fortunes that would make Stalin's whole empire look broke into the same exact thing. A 500-year-old dream. Now, has anybody actually done it? Has anybody beaten death? No, not yet. Not even close. At least not that we know of. The science is real, the money is real, but the fountain, still missing, and they keep digging harder than anyone in history, which leaves one obvious question. What do they know that the rest of us don't? And to get to that, we need to talk about the one method on this list that's the oldest, the darkest, and the one that nobody wants their name attached to, the blood of the young. Here's something that sounds like a horror movie, but it's real peer-reviewed science. Take an old animal and a young animal and surgically connect them so they share one blood supply. It's called parabiosis. When you do it, something incredible happens to the old one. Its muscles get stronger. Its liver repairs itself. Its brain sharpens up. The young blood makes the old body young again. This isn't science fiction. Cornell was running these experiments back in the 50s. Stanford revived it in 2005, and the results were stunning. By 2014, young blood was reversing memory loss in old mice. The fountain of youth at last. And it turns out it might be flowing through somebody else's veins. But wait, there's more. Remember that Soviet doctor I told you to hold on to? The one who died in 1928 transfusing other people's blood into himself? Bogdanov was chasing this 100 years ago. The young blood fountain of youth isn't a Silicon Valley idea, it's an old idea, a dangerous one, and it never went away. So in the 2010s, it comes roaring back. Clinics start popping up selling transfusions of young people's blood to richer, older clients. Critics have a name for it: vampire therapy. And remember Bryan Johnson, the don't die guy? He tried it. He took plasma from his own teenage son and pumped it into himself. He even gave his plasma to his own father. 3 generations swapping blood. It made headlines all over the world. Want to guess what happened? Nothing. Johnson tested himself, found no anti-aging benefit at all, and then quietly quit. The most measured man alive tried the vampire cure, and it didn't work. But one company took it the furthest, a startup called Ambrosia, founded by a man named Jesse Karmazin, a guy with a medical degree who was never actually licensed to practice medicine. And Ambrosia's product was simple: young blood for sale, $8,000 a liter, donors aged 16 to 25. He had around 600 wealthy clients paid up who got transfusions. February 2019, when the FDA stepped in, Ambrosia shut down that same day. The founders, by the way, later turned up involved with Scientology. And here's the name that made the young blood famous: Peter Thiel, billionaire, PayPal founder, backed Facebook. Around 2016, the story breaks that Peter Thiel is fascinated by parabiosis. He's quoted calling it a potential biological fountain of youth, and the internet does what the internet does. Peter Thiel, the vampire billionaire, draining the blood of the young to live forever. The story's everywhere. It becomes a South Park episode. A punchline becomes fact. Now, here's where I need you to pay attention, because in May 2026, somebody actually traced the story back to its source. And guess what they found? The whole thing comes from one magazine article from 2016. It said Thiel's personal doctor contacted that blood clinic. That's it. That's the whole foundation. Then it falls apart. The clinic's founder later said that Thiel never actually contacted him. Another outlet disputed that. And Thiel himself stood up at a public conference and said, quote, "I'm not a vampire." So which is it? Nobody can prove it. Nobody can disprove it. The most famous fountain of youth story of our entire lifetime is a tangle, a legend built on a single thread. If it feels familiar, it should, because we've seen this exact same thing before. Go back 500 years. A writer named Oviedo took a conquistador who came back with no gold and spun him into a legend where he died chasing magic water. It wasn't true, but it got written down and it became history. Now look at what just happened. A writer took a billionaire and spun him into a legend that he drinks the blood of the young to cheat death. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but it got written down and it became fact. Ponce de Leon, modern times, same machine, same myth, 481 years apart. We didn't just tell you the story of the Fountain of Youth. We just watched it get built twice. So, Who found the Fountain of Youth? The short answer, in 500 years, nobody. Not Ponce de Leon, who never even looked for it. Not Edgar Cayce, pointing at the bottom of the sea off Bimini. Not Bogdamovich, who promised 150 and died at 65. Not Stalin, not Ellison, not Bezos, not Thiel. Nobody ever found the water, but look at what we did find. A Spanish crown, a Soviet dictatorship, Silicon Valley. 3 civilizations, 3 systems of power, 500 years apart. And every single one of them puts the richest, most powerful people on the same exact hunt. The refusal to die. That's the strange part, folks, not the fountain. The insatiable desire to cheat death. It's the one thing a conquistador, a psychic, a dictator, and a guy with a Netflix show, they all have in common. And right now, as you watch this, there are people with more money than any king who ever lived digging for that water harder than anyone in history. Will they find it? Who knows? Maybe one day, maybe with the help of AI. But here's a thought I'll leave you with. Maybe 500 years from now, somebody makes a video about them. And if you want to see what really happens when a billionaire spends a fortune chasing the impossible, go watch our episode on Skinwalker Ranch, because that rabbit hole goes a lot deeper than blood. I'm John Genoa. This is America's Strangest History. Thanks for watching.